Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 British Columbia Immunization Forum. My name is Monika Naus. I'm the Medical Director for Immunization Programs and Vaccine Preventable Diseases at the BC Centre for Disease Control. And I'm so happy to be able to welcome you to this meeting, which is the first time that we're meeting in person since 2020. And I can tell... And I can tell by the buzz in the room and out in the foyer that everybody's happy to be able to get back together in person. Last night, I shook a hand for the first time in 3 years. One of our speakers, Anna Tadio's husband, put out a hand to me, and I thought, I would have said no to this a while back, but I think it's okay now. And so it's nice to be able to get back to normal. I was reflecting that when we had this meeting in person in 2020, March, I think it was probably the same day of the year, which we had planned to avoid snowstorms. We were told that, especially by our colleagues in Northern Health, that that was a safer time to travel. We held that meeting the same week that the dentists had their conference in Vancouver, which you might recall was a super spreader event for COVID. And fortunately, we did not become aware of a transmission at our event, but it was just before the lockdown. So I'm very happy that we're able to do this in person. But we do have 470 people registered online to participate. So we have a large online audience as well that we won't be aware of except during the question period. And so I'd like to welcome our online audience. And the online audience will be submitting their questions exclusively through the Slido app. And information on how to do that is on the program. There's a QR code, or there's a code that you can type in once you've downloaded Slido. And you can upvote questions. Many of you are probably familiar with Slido, and so if you see a question that you also have that's already been posted by someone, feel free to upvote that. And the moderator of the session will be able to pick the topmost questions to answer. It's very important for us to continue to maintain the networking that we can have through events like this, because the last 3 years have been very, as you know, very stressful and a tremendous challenge for people working in the immunization programs in the province because of the huge surge. Bonnie was pointing out that we've administered 16 million, over 16 million doses of COVID vaccine. Our usual doses distributed in the province of all vaccines combined, including influenza, has been just over 3 million per year. So the extent of this surge is really has not happened in our lifetime before. In the H1N1 2009 pandemic response, it was a far smaller program. And as you know, COVID isn't over yet in terms of ongoing vaccination. And we also are really enthused about getting back to some of our regular immunization programs. There are new vaccines in the pipeline for consideration in public health, including multivalent pneumococcal conjugate vaccines, a whole bunch of RSV vaccines, and we will be challenged to continue to promote, support, achieve and maintain high vaccination coverage, which is the goal of our immunization programs. Just a couple of housekeeping issues before we have our other morning introductions. At the end of the event, if you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for your continuing medical education, please submit an email to the IMS Forum account, so imsforum@bccdc.ca. And also, I'd like to let you know that after the morning session and after the afternoon session, you will receive a short Slido poll once you're logged into Slido. And if you could take 2 minutes to provide feedback through that, that would be appreciated. And then a longer evaluation will go out to you after the event. I think those are the main things at the outset. And I'd like to introduce you now to Shane Point, who's here from Musqueam Nation. Shane, we've been very grateful to have you attend these meetings for the last 2 times that they have been held. I'd like to acknowledge how grateful I am to be able to live and work on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, and in fact, you told me I should say Coast Salish people, so thank you very much. And last year, Shane introduced the forum, but it was on Zoom, and I told him how much I missed seeing him in person, because he has a tremendous physical presence that we don't get in quite the same way on Zoom. So thank you very much, Shane, for coming to welcome the members to this meeting.
I appreciate it very much. Good morning. Good morning. Come on, good morning. Ah, wow. When I see this esteemed lady's name on the screen, what comes to my mind looking at her surname is a word in my mother's language, Naus. That's what I see when I see the name, Naus. Naus is sunlight or daylight. In the prayer that she taught me when I was a boy, little boy, the word is Tlachshik Naus, part of a bigger prayer, but that's all I could remember, Tlachshik Naus. Tlachshik Naus means sunlight. Give me strength. So it's a prayer that we say first thing in the morning as the sun's coming up. Tlachshik Naus. Thichwam, Thichwam, Tlachshik Naus. Sunlight, daylight. Give me the strength that I need. Strength is knowledge. Here to share, Snowayeth. Snowayeth in the Coast Salish language means knowledge. Snowayeth, teachings, something you're going to learn. Pre-contact and now. We constantly believe and practice the redistribution of wealth. Wealth for us here was never physical, wasn't about currency of whatever the currency was, wasn't that. It was time, it was giving of oneself, constantly sharing, redistributing, sharing spirit with others. So, Tlachshik Naus, daylight, give me the strength that I need to share the knowledge. It's always an honor and a privilege for me to come to be here for this, because it amazes me. Without knowledge, we don't know. I'm constantly saying to young people, if you don't ask me, I don't know what you want to know. And they always go, oh, that's nice, Elder. And then they never ask. And then I go away and they're asking somebody else. They're going, oh, what about this? And they're going, you should have asked him. So it's the redistribution. And I'm always grateful to come and share a few moments with you, because it's important. Without knowledge, we don't know. If we don't know, we can't move ahead. Oh, oh, Quam Clock Shignas Thiquam Clock Shignas Sast Squallowin Quam Thit Silly Ta Snow Oh, CM Slaney, CM Saweka, in the chant, I'm asking daylight to please lift us up, give us the strength that we need, our hearts and our minds, squallowing. I'm also asking, please, sa'ast, lift up our spirits. Lift up our spirits with the knowledge that we're going to hear today so we can redistribute that not only to our relatives, but to those who need it the most. Without study, we can't help. Without redistributing knowledge, we can't help. And that's what we need to do, is to help others. I want to say to all of you, I'm grateful to you for your time, your choosing your educational path and your work path, because that path is to help others, and that's the biggest thing we can do, is to share time and space with our relatives. So thank you very much. CM Naus, thank you for the invitation for me to be here this morning. I'm truly grateful. Did I drop something? Have fun.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your work day.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful, and it's so nice. I feel like we're developing a bit of a relationship.
Remember, Naus, my mom's language means daylight. That's how I see your surname.
Thank you so much.
That's beautiful. You're the light.
Thank you.
Have fun.
I didn't know my name had a meaning until now. I won't tell you that it's actually Monika Naushova in Czech, but our next welcome is from the Provincial Health Officer. Dr. Bonnie Henry needs no introduction. Many of you will have seen her many, many times, even though maybe not in person, but Bonnie's been kind enough to come and introduce our events for several years. She's been the Provincial Health Officer since 2018, and she is the most senior public health official responsible for monitoring the health of British Columbians and undertaking measures for disease prevention and control and health protection. As she sneezes. Most recently, as you all know, she's led the province's response in the COVID pandemic and drug overdose emergency. And later this morning, she's going to be at a CBC radio interview on Hamilton Street. You can catch the podcast later, talking about both of those areas of activity. And recently, she was awarded the Order of British Columbia and the British Columbia Medal of Good Citizenship. So congratulations, Bonnie. Well deserved. Well deserved.
It is so wonderful to be here again in person. I still get excited. Julie and I were just saying, you know, this is, I've had a few events that I've been at in person in the last little while, but it's still exciting and new. So, and this is one of the events that I've been at since the very beginning, and so I'm really pleased to be here again today. And very pleased, and thank you to Elder Shane Point for starting us in a good way, to be here on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And the land acknowledgement is something that I'm very proud that we've adopted in BC and increasingly across the country. It's something that my office is spending a lot of time on, and not just to be pro forma, but to really understand and walk that path together on reconciliation. So what does that mean? And for me, it is recognizing that we, as white settlers on these lands across British Columbia, where First Nations have called these lands and waters home, across the entire province and across this country since time immemorial, and recognizing that we have work to do to put us on that path of reconciliation. And part of that for me is recognizing that my background, I come from, I'm a seventh generation Canadian. My family were Scottish Scottish poor people from Scotland who were essentially kicked out of the Highlands by the aristocracy. And they came to what's now, what is Mi'kmaq territory on the east coast of Canada. And I have benefited from that. My family was able to make a good life here in Canada. And I had the privilege of working and living in this country. And I know and I acknowledge that that has come at the expense of the First Nations people who were here. And we have work to do in this work of reconciliation, to recognize that the systems that we've put in place, and we use the words of white supremacy, which is an uncomfortable word, but we have put in systems in this country that have systematically kept Indigenous people down and out. And those systems are based on the idea that the Western European white settler was a better person, or the white supremacy. So we are using that language now in my office, and we're identifying where these systems have put in place what we call colonial knots that are still in place today, that mean that it's more difficult for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in this province to do the things, to achieve their full health and wellness, and to contribute in ways that we can make a difference. And so we are exploring, and I want all of you to think about how you can explore and can identify these knots in your work and the things that we do every day. And we can untie these knots, and that is those steps that we can take together on that path of reconciliation. We need to commit to addressing white supremacy in the systems we work in. It's not about people. It's about recognizing that the systems that we are all working in have these ways of keeping BIPOC people out. So we need to commit to walking together on this journey of reconciliation, recognizing that truth. I'm also grateful to be here today in person to recognize, and I really want to celebrate you, the immunizers, the community that we work in, the teams that have come together, particularly in this past 3 years. We've overcome every possible barrier and roadblock to ensure that every single person in British Columbia has had the opportunity to be protected through vaccination. And it just amazes me. We've been on this journey together that has been longer and harder than even I, who spent a lot of time working on pandemic preparedness, could have even imagined. And where I come from, we have a saying in PEI that common suffering builds strong bonds. We have these bonds, all of us, from what we've been through. And we remember the fear that we faced when COVID tore through our long-term care homes. You know, we look back on and kind of roll our eyes and laugh about the dental conference, but that was a tsunami that started. And then we had a wave that came up from Washington State. And, you know, I still remember deep in my guts that first day when we had an outbreak in a long-term care home in the Lynn Valley. And then, you know, we had our ICUs full of young people who were very, very sick, and how scary that was. And then we had vaccines. And these vaccines saved lives. Our elders, our seniors, immune-compromised people, our family, our community. And we've now delivered over 16 million doses of these vaccines to everybody in every corner of this province. And that's because of the work that you have done together. And all of the uncertainty we weathered, the relationships that we had from this forum, from the work that we've done in what I call the before times, that meant that we could make decisions, things like really crucial decisions, expanding the interval between dose 1 and dose 2. You know, that was a big decision. And we made those decisions. And it was a heavy burden to make those decisions. But it was confidence in the public health and immunizer community that we had here, the Vaccine Evaluation Center, our clinical teams, that allowed us to make these crucial decisions and to save lives. And for that, you are all my heroes, and I thank you. We're now in a place of emergence, I believe, from COVID-19, from the pandemic, but SARS-CoV-2 is going to be with us for a while yet, for the foreseeable future. But it will be now different because of the vaccinations and the immunity that we have. I believe we will still need to keep our vaccine skills honed. We will, particularly, you know, we're looking at perhaps a booster dose for high-risk people this spring, and maybe all of us next fall. We still don't know the details of that. We'll have to see as we move through this next few months. But this will be added to our lexicon of vaccine-preventable diseases. Vaccine-preventable diseases. And maybe, hopefully, in a few years, we'll have a pan-COVID vaccine and we'll only have to do it once in our lifetime. But we've witnessed a quantum leap in vaccine technology with the mRNA vaccines, and we were talking a little bit about this last night. We need to keep supporting the development of these vaccines and understanding how they work. We don't yet know where it's going to lead us, but the possibility is really, it's immense. And I have a tremendous amount of optimism about how we can harness that brain trust that went into developing these vaccines so quickly in these past few years to address some of the other really tough challenges that we have not yet been able to solve. And we look at RSV, we're looking at HIV. I mean, maybe that's a false hope, but I think this type of technology is going to help us. Cancer vaccines, individualized cancer vaccines, and we have the ability, the knowledge, the brain trust, the connections to be able to look at how those vaccines are working. You know, everything from the fact that we put every single dose was recorded in our provincial immunization registry. That meant that we could tell exactly who had what vaccine when by lot number, and we could see the vaccine effectiveness. We could measure the vaccine effectiveness over time. We could measure the benefits from things like extending the interval, mixed doses, etc. So, and we need to keep supporting the development of these new vaccines. Today I want to recognize, though, and celebrate everyone in this room and online. We have weathered this storm of this past 3 years, and we have prevailed because of you. It has been the most challenging of times, at least for me, it still is. And we have pushed and supported each other, and we can't go back. We can't unsee what we have all learned and experienced, particularly some of the inequities that we have seen in our communities in things like access to vaccines and faith and confidence in vaccine. So I'm looking to you to embrace and harness the energy from what we've been through together. The IMS-BC platform to support immunization beyond COVID and flu, supporting alternative immunizers who stepped up with your guidance and support, and that's key. We were able to expand our ability to provide vaccination, and we need to keep up those relationships. We have challenges. we need to rebuild confidence in vaccines. That misinformation and disinformation that I know we'll talk a little bit more about has undermined, made our job more difficult. But we have the faith and we have the knowledge. And, you know, Elder Shane Point talked about knowledge. We have that, and we have that together collectively, and we can support each other, especially to make sure that we get our childhood immunizations up to date again. We have some of the best supports in the world, in this province, in this room, online here. And spreading the word about things like CARD, and I know Anna Taddeo's here, and talking to parents, children, adults about vaccines. I am so proud of the work you have all done in the most difficult of times, and the work you do every day. So let's build on this time, recognize the suffering and the challenges and the learnings that we've been through, and continue to develop the best possible immunization program for everybody here in BC. Thank you. Merci. Marcy. Haichkasiem.
Thank you very much for that great introduction and for that expression of gratitude as well. And we appreciate your leadership, Bonnie, very much, and your affinity for immunization, because I know that immunization has a soft spot in your heart. Our first session is going to be moderated by Stephanie Meyer, who is our senior practice lead in the immunization programs at the BC Centre for Disease Control. It's session 1 in your program on equity and cultural safety. And I'd like to invite, I think, do you want your speakers up here? Not yet, okay. And so Stephanie, please take over. I'd like to mention that for the folks in the room, there are 2 microphones at either side of the seating area. And so if you're sufficiently brave, and I know this audience is terrific at getting up to the microphone, please do come up after each session to ask your questions at the microphone. So that's in addition to the Slido option, which is available for you, but is really primarily intended for our online audience.
So, hi, good morning, everyone. So I have the pleasure of moderating the first session today, which is focused on equity and cultural safety. These presentations will focus primarily on Indigenous peoples and communities, acknowledging the long-standing health inequities caused by current and historical impacts of colonization. Incorporating cultural humility into our work is essential, recognizing oneself as a learner when it comes to understanding another's experience. And as healthcare providers, humbly working to listen and learn from the resilience and strength of Indigenous peoples. There will be 4 presentations within this session, with a 30-minute nutrition break after the second presentation. Following the last presentation, we will invite all of our speakers back up to the stage for questions from our in-person and virtual audience. Monika said, for those in the room, mics are set up, and our virtual and in-person attendants can also submit questions via Slido throughout the presentations. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first presenters, Elder Doreen Peter and Fairley Mendoza, who will be joining us virtually, and Dr. Julie Bettinger from the Vaccine Evaluation Center. Please refer to your program for the biographies for each of our speakers. Thank you.
So I'm really hoping my co-presenters are able to join virtually. They had intended to come in person, but Mother Nature had some other ideas and the flights were canceled yesterday. So unfortunately, I'm here. Oh, good, Fairley's up there. And I think Doreen is there too. We just might not have a video on for her. Is that correct? Does anybody know? Okay, well, we'll go ahead, and we're really honored to be here with you today. And I'll do my best to sort of represent the findings from the community, but I feel a little bit nervous about that because I'm not from the community, and fortunately we do have community, Doreen is here, Elder Doreen is here, and so I think she can probably much better be the voice than I can, but I'll provide the scientific evidence around it, and we can have a conversation about it later. So I was really honored to be able, and probably I should figure out how to advance the slides before I get too much further. Here we go. I was really honored to be invited to participate in this project, and we started it prior to the pandemic and then worked through the pandemic on it. And it was really, it's been one of the more favorite things that I've done. And just to have the disclosure up here, we don't have any affiliations with pharmaceutical, medical device, or communication organizations. I do sit on the National Advisory Committee for Immunization. Okay, it's very sensitive, sorry. Okay, so here we go. So the reasons that Fairley and Doreen approached me about this is that they had some real concerns about what they were seeing in terms of their immunization coverage in the community. And what they had observed is about 2 to 5 out of 10 Cowichan infants and children were not immunized. And this had been a real shift from what it had looked like in prior years, and I think Fairley may touch on this some more. But they were concerned, obviously, about the increase in diseases that they were also seeing in the community. There had been outbreaks of whooping cough or pertussis, and COVID made the situation worse, as we all know. I don't need to spend a lot of time going into that. So what we did was in February 2020, so prior to lockdown, we were able to conduct a few sharing circles with community members, and then had to move virtually for the rest of the work, given that it took place throughout most of the pandemic when a lot of things were locked down. And so we did phone or video interviews from April through March. And we had a research assistant who was able to speak with people who work in the community. And then we had 2 elders, Doreen being one of them, who spoke directly with community members. And so we spoke with a total of 25 individuals, and then kind of compiled what we had heard from all of those individual interviews, and then conducted a Facebook event. Again, the preference would obviously have been to have done all of this in person, but we were very much constrained by the pandemic situation. So the next best thing was to sort of do this over Facebook with community members, and it was open to all of the community. And so what I'm going to show you today are sort of the findings from all of this and what we heard from both the individual interviews as well as the community meeting. And we're still not done. We're hoping at some point that we can actually have a real in-person community meeting. I think the 3 of us are very much looking forward to that. And really, we've given some of the information back to the community, but we're still not done, and there's still a bit more work I think that we need to do around that. So what did we learn? So I think first off, and what became quite clear in talking to all of the individuals in the community, was the importance of family member opinions, and especially the matriarch. And this was a quote from one of our participants that I thought summed this idea up very nice. But we trust our relatives more than we trust anybody on the outside, which is, obviously because of the issues with colonization. The majority of our community would trust a rumor from an elder more than the truth from a doctor, if that makes sense. And I think that sums up actually a lot of the issues that we found from our participants, both in terms of valuing the input of community members, regardless of what that input looks like. It may not support the scientific view or the medical view. And also you start to see some of the impact of colonialism and coming out in that quote. I think the other piece that was really important were long-term relationships. And this is in terms of relationships with individuals who work in the community, individuals at the health center, as well as other community members. And again, this quote I think nicely sums it up too. There are certain families who only want to deal with certain nurses based on, she was my mom's nurse, or I know her because she immunized me as a kid, and I saw her all the way through. I trust that nurse, and I want to deal with that nurse. And we see this in other aspects of medicine, this sort of longitudinal care relationship. But for me, this, I think, goes a step beyond what we normally think of as a longitudinal care relationship. We're talking several generations of care by the same individual. And I think if we don't recognize the importance of that, and even if it's only the same person for one individual, having that same person there every time that person comes to the clinic is incredibly important. And when we switch people out and there's not that continuity, it's very, very harmful. And so then we had also lots of conversations around, well, what sort of vaccine information would be helpful? What do you need? And, as I think we hear this all the time. It needs to be information they can understand, right? In lots of different formats, not just a poster, not just a pamphlet. And in fact, most parents now prefer online or videos to anything sort of print-based. And I think the other really, really important thing is that it must be culturally appropriate. We heard this throughout. And I think understanding what that means for this community is important, because what is culturally appropriate in one place may not be culturally appropriate somewhere else. And so having those conversations with individuals in the community and figuring out what that means is critical. And then the other piece that really came up that I want to focus on is pain management. This for parents is a really big deal, and being able to manage that for their children and reassure them and, you know, provide things such as the numbing patches so the child doesn't even feel the immunization. Most parents don't even know that exists. And so that was something that parents were very focused on, and I think addressing some of those things would really go a long way. And then the big one, legacy of colonialism, and how this affects trust and how it continues to affect trust in the healthcare system, in medical providers, in the health clinic. And I think, you know, it's not just that one parent who's coming in with their child, it's the experience of that entire family, of the parents of that parent, of the grandparents. And this affects very much whether or not that individual trusts the healthcare system, that healthcare provider, and whether or not they will even bring their children into the clinic. And there's a really high level of mistrust in the existing health system and center. And so until we can figure out ways to address this and work with this, I think we're going to continue to have problems, you know, reaching our target immunization rates. It's there, it exists, and we've got to figure out how to work with communities to rebuild this trust. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a decade, generation-long process, and we need to recognize that. So what else was missing? So that's what we heard from the interviews. And then this was sort of some other pieces that came out when we did the community forum. And I think oops, let me back up here. So the piece that was very interesting to me was around cultural safety and the importance of providing care in a safe way. But I think what we also heard was this incorporates traditional medicine, and this is often lacking in the care that's provided. And for it to be considered kind of culturally safe care, it needs to incorporate that element. You know, not just in terms of the Western medical viewpoint, but what sorts of traditional medicines could also be appropriate in terms of perhaps pain management or the spirituality. This never or rarely gets combined, and for the community, it was very, very important that they had this. And so I think, you know, this was kind of just hitting on the surface of it, and this is what we saw from the conversations and the data. And I'd like to kind of turn it over now to Fairley and Doreen, because I think they will provide an even broader perspective around some of these conversations that I've highlighted here so far. So I will hand it off, I hope. Fairley will be up next. Yeah.
Okay. I will go ahead and test the sound.
Yep, it's good.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Fairley Mendoza. I'm a community health nurse here in this territory on Vancouver Island of Quetson people since 1995. So I'm here to join Julie and yourselves to give a little background to the work that we did and to introduce my co-worker and respected elder, Doreen Peter, who will follow myself. In our territory, we have about 5,500 members, and we are all over the place. There's different villages that are separated by off-reserve land and on-reserve land. There's the big river running through it all. And it's quite a unique community in that we're somewhat rural and somewhat very urban at the same time. So we have, I would say, right from the beginning, about 80 to 100 births a year. So we are a growing community with a very young demographic. transfer of health services from Health Canada to Chief and Council happened in 1992. So there is self-governance to some degree in health services. What we've seen with our maternal health population is later motherhood since the years that I've been here. Certainly in the last 10 years, we have remarkably less very young mothers, like say mothers who are under 17. So that I think speaks to some of the trends that relate to immunization. We see more women and families in the workforce and in school. Certainly in those early years in the 90s and early 2000s, we had extremely high unemployment rates and low graduation rates. And that's a good thing that that's starting to change. However, socioeconomic circumstances are tough here. They really are very challenging for many families. We know one of the highest preterm birth rates in Canada, and we're currently doing some community-based research with that. So in terms of our immunizations, we have, for many years offered immunizations to the community in the following way. Our community health representatives, who are typically primary healthcare workers who are tribes members and who are often respected members who have a good knowledge of families in the community, and they have been the liaison workers with nursing for years, going out to families, to doctors, to other health teams, but particularly to remind families of when immunizations are due. And this worked very effectively for years. We would have a drop-in clinic, and small families, big families, generations would come and just drop in, and we would get to immunizing everybody of all ages at that visit. So sometime, I would say, probably around 2011 or so, we started to notice a little bit of a shift. Our attendance was down a bit, and it did take a few years, quite honestly, to see this shift occurring. And I would say this was a time, again, when people were less available in the daytime. There's starting to be more employment. There's also the rise of social media and phones. The other interesting impact on our community was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who gathered testimony from residential school survivors from 2007 and 2015. This occurred in our territory as well. And my personal observation is prior to that time, there had been less open discussion or open in the social space of media, but also within families. There seemed to be a little bit more opening about elders and older people who attended the schools talking about it in a way that we hadn't heard so much before. And again, only my personal opinion, I question whether that started to raise some questions for younger people having a bigger view of what had happened and what is happening in their communities. Around 2015, we really noticed we were starting to go down. We had been enjoying 95% coverage rates, better than the public health neighbors around us up until around that time, and it was starting to slide. So we started to do things like create family fun events during immunization clinics, prizes, snacks, those kind of things. And we pursued with that, having events. We'd all dress up for Easter and Santa days, pulling out all the things we could to encourage attendance at immunization clinics. However, that did not change. It did not change. We were reluctant to go on social media and Facebook, having had the experience of posting about immunization clinics and getting jumped on by anti-vaxxers, not from our community, but from just out there. They would get on and start these discourses against the vaccines. So with SARS-CoV-2 arriving in 2020, we naturally, like many communities, we had a massive shutdown. Our community really did lock down, and our immunization service shrunk to appointments with mother and child only. So it looked very different than before. And at first we had a good attendance, I think, because no one had an opportunity to leave their home hardly. So it was favored to come and attend health center clinics. However, once the restrictions were lifted, we found many families sliding back to just not coming. I would say some families have chosen not to come at all, and we have a large number who come not on time or not at all. There's just a varied audience out there. So if you're questioning about how did we do with COVID, actually with COVID vaccination, immunization, we did tremendously well. We had a very good uptake in the beginning, particularly among the over 60s. They're very highly vaccinated in our community, and like the rest of our North American community, it kind of diminishes as we go down in age. So we don't have a good uptake among children. It's fair in youth and gets better as we get increasing age. So we did make one change that I'll add to this background is we, in 2021, 22, we went over to an app so families can book their own appointments and they get text reminders. So this works well for some families, and they're able to come here 5 days a week and book an appointment. But it, reviewing our stats for last year, not great. We're still about 50% with our 2-year-olds and about 70 with our 7-year-olds. And this is a long way from where we would like to be. We have tried going into schools. We have done outreach in gyms, but we still don't get the increase in rates. So I'm just going to finish now and say thank you to the presenters today. Thank you, audience, for coming. Thank you for the organizers of this conference. I acknowledge the territory I'm on. I'm a settler of European background, first generation, and I am full of gratitude for my life here in Vancouver Island, where we reside and work, and acknowledge that we are most grateful guests today. So in terms of our future endeavors, I think Doreen and Julie and I have arrived at understanding better that we need a very community-based solution. That means involving our elders and other generations, identifying community thought leaders. We understand there is distrust of healthcare generally, and immunizations fall into that. We know that immunization really is a subject of community agreement, and that's where our work will be. In terms of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there are 94 calls to action, and amongst them, there's some important ones for us to cite as regards this work. And one of them, of course, is asking that we acknowledge, I'm just reading from the text, that the current state of Indigenous health in Canada is a direct result of Canadian government policies, including residential schools, and to recognize and implement healthcare rights of Indigenous people. Number 19 asks that we establish measurable goals to identify and close those gaps, such as our immunization rates. 22 importantly asks that we recognize the value of Indigenous healing practices and healers. And I think Julie mentioned that our community members who were interviewed talked about this. Lastly, we really need to see more Indigenous healthcare professionals across the board and retain them in our communities. We need to call upon our nursing schools, medical schools, all of us to engage in skills-based training in history, intercultural competency, human rights, and anti-racism. So I really thank you for letting me share today about our community, and I feel very pleased and hopeful that we've made a little start to work better, to be better as healthcare workers in our community. So with that, I want to introduce my dear friend and co-worker, Doreen Peter. And Doreen, of course, is elder who is very, very busy and called upon to share her knowledge. I had many, many years of being able to go to Doreen and say, Doreen, how do we do this? How do I do this work in the community? And she's just a gold mine of insight. So thank you, Doreen, for all your years working with us. You tried to retire, but it's not really happening. So, hi, Sapka. Thank you, everybody, today.
Oh, wow. Where do I start? I want to start by acknowledging each and every one of you that's at this conference and to say I am deeply regretful for not being able to attend in person as we were meant to be, but Mother Nature has her own ideas of people keeping still right at this moment. So we were unable to be there with you. But I am deeply honored to be part of this, and thank you, Julie and Fairley, for the your part in our presentation, and it really speaks to. I would also like to acknowledge each and every one that is present first for being part of this immunization forum and being there to help one another understand all about working in Indigenous communities and understanding the challenges, the barriers, what works, what doesn't work, and all of the hard work that's going into this forum. So I really appreciate each and every one of you, near and far. And my part in this, I'd like to think, is to talk about a lot of the challenges that we faced, and my part in this had to do with the legacies of colonialism, and right off the bat I was trying to break it down, and I said those are such big words for me to understand, so I broke down legacies, and then I broke down colonialism, and I figured it out, and I said, oh, okay, I get it. You know, there's the challenges of technology, the challenges of the words, and a lot of us come from the residential school era, and sadly enough, I am one of them, but proudly enough, I still stand here and I still stand strong, and I'm able to share a lot about residential school, and I understand our community members when they have some objections to why I'm visiting them. And that's when we call them the old people, and that's meant as a sign of, as a wording of respect. You know, the old people were the knowledge keepers, the wisdom holders, and all of that. And the elders of the family, the old people of the family, is the ones that we really need to connect with. And their first thing was when I used to go knocking on their door, you know, they would be grateful that we go to the door and acknowledge them and share with them why we're there and what we were hoping to ask of them. And so they're grateful and thankful that we come to the door and see them personally. This is one of the big areas of challenges nowadays, and you heard Fairley talk about the app that we're using, but a lot of our people aren't as tech-friendly as some of them are. So, you know, the old way still works, and it still works well. So when we talk about how we connect with our people, and it's really important that a lot of face-to-face is done and all of that. And when I talk about the legacies of colonialism, I think of the residential school era, which is one of the biggest barriers in my community, because a big percentage of our my generation that's still here and the elder generation, there's still a few that are still with us today. And it's those challenges that we face when we think about what we're asking of them. And then the first thing that comes up, oh, that just reminds me of residential school. You guys just used us as guinea pigs. You know, all of this starts coming out, the words start coming out, and we have to sit there and listen and let them vent and get it all out of their system. So that's one of the things that we really face in the community, is that our elders were part of that era, part of all that horror. And when they still related to the system nowadays, when even though the health center is all about looking after our community, they don't see it that way. They still have in the back of their minds that now they're using our children, our babies as guinea pigs. So it's really hard to get past that. And we think about some people who share and say, well, that was in the past, you know, it's time to get over that. And then my response to that is, well, you tell me how. You tell me how we can do that. So as we're working and continuously trying to find ways to work with our elders, work with our families, we have to acknowledge their pain, we have to acknowledge their words, and let them vent and let them get it out of their hearts. And then we can, after they're all settled, then we can start talking about how things are changing and how people are now trying to help our children stay healthy. We have lost so many children in the past now, so we really need to help them try and understand that both worlds can come together. Both worlds can work with one another, not samat, working together as one. That we're not trying to be better than anybody else, and they're not trying to be any better than any of us either, that they're actually here to try and help, to try and keep our children healthy right from birth, right from as the immunized stages go through. That's what we're all trying to help our children with. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we faced in our community, and it's not going to go away. You know, there always will be this legacy that they're talking about. It will always be there in the background somehow. And as our future generation healthcare workers, it's up to them to understand now and get it on what they're trying to, for them to understand the horrors from back when, so that they're able to work with the up and coming mothers now who are the next generation. So we're trying to work with the next generation now, and we're trying to help them bring their children, keep their children's health up. And when we go out and we do visits, or the nurses talk to them, or whatever, however it's brought to the surface, then the message is that this is for the best health of your baby. And we have to work with them that, yes, we totally understand that your family elders are not comfortable with this idea, but it's all about trying to help have a healthier family member. So most of the time we can get past that. Most of the time we can get through to the moms and say, okay, then, you know, they'll agree to bring their child into the health center and have them work with our nurses and have them have their child immunized, which is also great. But when you think about what we're asking of our elders, we really have to acknowledge their pain first, and then we get to talk about the business So there's been a lot of changes in our healthcare system as well, and we think about the ongoing racism and especially the social determinants of health, how that plays a big factor in helping our young moms and have their babies staying healthy. And I think, when I'm not going to quite finish with the residential school part of it, was when the time came for all of the schools, for all of the funding that they were going to get. That's when it all came back to life again. That's what happened all over again. At first it was the residential school, now there's the day school. So all of this is bringing everything back to the surface again for a lot of our people. And I think that was my point, my biggest point, is that all of this is being brought back to the surface. So we would love to see everyone working with our community members and especially listening and especially acknowledging, and then being able to work with our families. And I think another one of the biggest issues that we have is the continuous reminders of the loss of our language, the loss of our culture. But it wasn't lost, it just wasn't practiced for a while, and now everything is coming back. Our language is coming back, all our tradition and culture is coming back to life very strong, and as part of that, it all has to do with the health of each and every one of us. So able to bring our younger generation, our babies, to continue all of this, we need them healthy. So our people understand that our future generation needs to be kept healthy, needs to be able to move forward and continue carrying on all of our culture and tradition. And in order to do that, they need to be working with our health center and keeping all of our people healthy. This may be about the immunization rate now, but it covers all areas of all ages of our community, and working together to keep everyone healthy and everyone walking a good, healthy path. So this is all together working as one. And I think in another, it's the understanding that we're trying to get across is that both worlds need to be working together, even with what we call our slach and our medicine. We still need the help of the Western medicine to help our children grow. Our cultural medicine can only take them so far. So we do need to help work with our community members. We need to help them understand. We need to be able to work as one, that everybody needs to be able to work as a one unit for the health and wellness of all of the babies in all of the communities. Coaching is just I hate using that word, just, Coaching is one community of many Aboriginal communities, and not only Coaching is suffering, all the other communities are suffering. This is where all of you come together, and why you guys are coming, why we're all coming together to be able to understand all of the information that's coming from each and every one of us, and each and whoever all the speakers are. You have that message to deliver. You have those words of sharing with one another, so that after this is all put together, yes, we can understand one another. Yes, we can help one another. Yes, we can eventually work together. So this is what I have to offer for today. And I really thank every one of you who are listening, all the speakers before me, all the speakers after me. I definitely appreciate each and every one of you for for being present and hungry for that information to be able to work in different communities. So I will leave it there. Hatsapta. Thank you all.
So thank you, Elder Doreen, Fairley, and Julie, for your presentation and for sharing the experiences of the Cowichan tribes and the valuable learnings. As a reminder, in-person and virtual participants can submit questions via Slido and upvote questions that you would like to see addressed in the panel discussion at the end. I would like to now introduce our next set of presenters, Kathy Chilton from the BC Centre for Disease Control and Bhavna Sharma from the First Nations Health Authority, who will be presenting on recent updates to the BC CDC Immunization Competency Course and Skills Checklist.
It's a tough one to follow. Thanks so much for the introduction, Stephanie. So happy to be here with you all. I guess I should figure out the clicker too. Perfect. Before we dive in, so thankful for Shane's beautiful opening and welcome to these traditional territories today, as well as the wisdom shared in the presentation preceding this one. I think it really lays the foundation for the rest of the day today. This is my disclosure slide. They said it was mandatory to display, so I'm here to say that I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. I'm here with members of my team from FNHA in the audience, and I'll be representing my team as we talk about a project about embedding culturally safe practice considerations into the immunization skills checklist. Also want to acknowledge that the funding for this project that we worked on came from the BC Immunization Committee, so thank you for funding the project. And also acknowledging that myself and Kathy both come from various settler backgrounds and have started our learning journeys, but are no means by any means an expert on this topic. And so we're grateful to be here with our teams today to share our learning journey so far and what's been incorporated to date, but definitely a long way to go. For those not familiar with FNHA, I'll start off and explain a little bit about the organization. So as the first and only provincial First Nations Health Authority in Canada, FNHA works with communities, community health nurses, government partners, regional health authorities, lots of folks contributing to improve health outcomes for First Nations people across the province. FNHA's work doesn't replace the work of the Ministry of Health or regional health authorities. Rather, we really work together and collaborate towards that vision displayed on the screen, the vision of healthy, self-determining, and vibrant children, families, and communities. So this slide is borrowed from the Cultural Safety and Humility team at FNHA, and it really is a good reminder of the history and also the shared goals. Let me see if my clicker is gonna. So, sorry. All right, so as we have learned from elders, Indigenous colleagues, various courses like the SANIUS Indigenous Cultural Safety course, pre-contact, Indigenous communities had their own ways of keeping healthy. There were complex systems in place in all of these areas displayed on the screen, and it really contributed to that health and wellness of communities, individuals, and families. However, we also know, and has been discussed already during the session, that with the imposition of colonial laws and systems after contact, there was a drastic impact on the health and wellness of Indigenous people. And so in our presentation, we're not going to dive into the impacts of different institutions and systems. These are important truths represented in courses like SANIUS, which we might have all taken, in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in the In Plain Sight report. That information is available for all of us. With that information available, we know that Indigenous people have told us that even today, racism is widespread, including in healthcare settings, and that really impacts access to healthcare, resulting in inequitable access. So the need for healthcare workers to incorporate cultural safety and cultural humility into our day-to-day practice is a clear call to action, a clear recommendation found in the reports represented on the previous slide. You're likely familiar with the definitions on the screen. These are also taken from the FNHA website, really talking about the difference between cultural safety and cultural humility. So to summarize, cultural safety is that outcome that can only be, decided by the client. So if a client feels safe in an immunization or a healthcare encounter, feels safe to keep accessing immunization or healthcare services, that's up to the client to decide if they felt safe in that encounter. Cultural humility is more about that internal process, our process as healthcare providers, to self-reflect, understand where we're at, what we know about this, where we have still some areas to improve and learn. And so really approaching each interaction, each healthcare encounter as a learner. So with that background, where we've established and you've heard from the previous presentations that cultural humility and cultural safety are foundational to our work. So at the immunization team at FNHA, we're really looking at, incorporating practical ways that we can support embedding culturally safe practices during immunization clinics. So how do we translate that to our context? For the purpose of this session, I'll share with you today an aspect of a project our team worked on to improve the immunization skills checklist. The project was called Immunization Skills Checklist Improvement Project. There were a couple of objectives, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'll focus on the objective that's related to cultural safety and humility. The pictures you'll see on this slide and a couple of the slides following were from an infographic that we developed in partnership with Drawing Change, because we really wanted to provide just a visual representation of that process. Also, it makes for pretty slides. So let's zoom in a bit into the infographic. So one of the objectives of this project was to embed cultural safety and humility into the immunization skills checklist. So for those familiar with the checklist, we support new immunizers with the checklist to tick off, whether we're ready to practice. But really embedding cultural safety and humility into the checklist we thought to do that with the intent to support immunizers to be prepared to create safe spaces with clients and improve client care and access to immunizations. So why? When talking about equity and access to services, over the years, community health nurses, you heard from Fairley and Couch and other community health nurses that have interacted with our team that work in various First Nations communities across BC, have shared many times the importance of trust, building relationships with community members to create those safe spaces and improve access to IM services. When working with our team, elders, knowledge keepers, specifically Elder and Knowledge Keeper Sequoia, who works closely with FNHA, has also emphasized the key role of nurses working in community and public health settings. That's that point of contact where a nurse can establish a safe environment, use each immunization encounter as an opportunity to really explore the health and wellness goals of the presenting client or family, maintaining that holistic view, so as to create safe spaces where clients are more likely to keep coming back and keep accessing immunization services. So the question was, we have this, great body of knowledge. How do we translate this and emphasize this for new immunizers? All right, so I messed up my slides and there we go. They're in the right order now. So when looking at how we would incorporate these learnings into the immunization skills checklist, we were grateful to draw on the work done by provincial partners to really use a two-wide seeing approach. Now, I'm not the expert on this, and there's probably folks in the room that can explain this better than I can, but I'll do my best. So this phrase, two-eyed seeing approach, was coined by elders Albert and Merdina Marshall. And so the intent of the phrase is to note that both Indigenous and Western knowledge should be equally regarded to create new learnings and pathways that promote and support the health of First Nations people. It acknowledges that Indigenous people are the most appropriate persons to guide healthcare providers in best practices for the health and wellness of communities. And so it's really about that partnership with communities, building relationship, what we heard Elder Doreen talk about. So although we had some idea of what embedding culturally safe practices into the checklist might look like, when we were working through areas of the checklist that could be improved, we were limited because we didn't have that opportunity for direct community consultation. In the Cowichan project, there was direct community consultation, but that's not something we had capacity for during COVID. So we remembered what had been shared with us by community health nurses, by elders and knowledge keepers, but then also relied on direct community consultation, direct consultation with Indigenous healthcare workers that had been done by the BC College for Nurses and Midwives and the BC Patient Quality and Safety Council. So on the next screen is a snapshot of the resources provided through the BCCNM and the BC PSQC. Sorry. So these organizations, again, consulted with Indigenous patient partners, Indigenous healthcare workers to inform the recommendations. And so on the purple is the document through BCCNM. It incorporates Indigenous experiences that have been generously shared for our learning as healthcare providers. And, it's not the responsibility of Indigenous clients and families to teach us how to be culturally safe, but, these learnings have been generously shared so that, we can be supported in our learning journeys about how to really improve our practice. And the same with the companion guide through the Patient Quality and Safety Council. Again, direct consultation was done. So when we looked at those documents, there were priority areas that were identified, and really these themes came forward, and they were the same themes that we had heard from community health nurses, from elders, really about self-reflective practice, emphasizing strength-based and trauma-informed practice, and person-led and relational care. So these snapshots on this screen are videos that the college has collaborated and put together to support registrants with this journey. So based on the information available, what were the changes? So over the span of the project, the team carried out surveys with community health nurses, a pilot project, took a long time, to confirm the changes represented on the slide. So we'll break down the changes here. So the updated checklist now emphasizes the core concepts and principles displayed on the screen. So it really has a focus on taking time to build rapport, engage respectfully, build relationships with clients, approaching each immunization encounter with curiosity about the individual and the family, and taking time to learn and explain. So on the screen, it's a little detailed, but essentially we're looking at the colors here. So you'll see all the green text are additions related to improving culturally safe care. So this is one heading on the checklist that talks about performing client assessment prior to immunization. So it's a snapshot of the checklist that has some of these pieces incorporated. So it's kind of how we can translate those principles into what we do during an immunization encounter. For example, one of the points on the screen is obtaining permission from the client for a pre-vaccination assessment. And so that might be, that's an extra step. We're thinking about, we're already going to ask questions, but we're asking permission to ask questions. What does that mean? What does that relate to? So really it ties back to the practice standard and recognizing that, we're trying to come at this with a trauma-informed approach, recognizing the potential for trauma. And it's a simple question in practice, is it all right if I ask you some questions about your health to determine if you're eligible for additional vaccines? But that really slows us down, helps us to avoid making assumptions, and supports us with providing person-centered care. So the final checklist is not color-coded, and it's all one, and these are kind of embedded throughout, but this is kind of a visual of how we kind of took that piece by piece and incorporated those considerations into the checklist. So So other changes that were included into the immunization skills checklist were more tied to the process. So remember, in the practice standard, there was a big emphasis on self-reflection. That's what cultural humility is all about. And so, how we translated that was including a self-assessment column for all points on the checklist. So ahead of meeting with the assessor, the new immunizer can go through all the points, see how they feel about their own practice related to what's on the checklist. And if learning needs are identified, making that learning plan to work towards those goals. And those goals could include learning more about cultural humility and providing culturally safe care. The process of getting signed off on the checklist also now incorporates a strength-based approach because, the immunizer has a chance to take a look and see where they stand ahead of meeting with the assessor, and that promotes safety in the immunizer and assessor relationship as well. So those were the changes that we made, and when we wrapped up the project, we recommended that BC-CDC take it on, incorporate the findings of the project, and launch the provincial immunization skills checklist so that these considerations could be adopted for immunizers province-wide. So we were happy to see that in the months following the completion of the project, the BC-CDC updated the provincial immunization skills checklist, updated the immunization competency course to really talk about these principles. Oops, too fast. I'm not done yet. So this slide is also borrowed from the cultural safety team at FNHA, and it's also very pretty. And it really highlights and recognizes that, whether we're experienced healthcare providers or brand new, all of us have our unique learning journeys. And so sharing our insights and experiences and stories is often the best way to learn. So we're super grateful to have had this opportunity to share a little bit about what our learning journey has looked like so far, and look forward to continued conversations about how culturally safe practices can be further embedded into immunization clinics. So with that, I will thank you and pass to Kathy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Bhavna. Just wait for our slides to come up. Oh, perfect. So this part of the presentation will look at how the culturally safe care considerations have been incorporated into the BC-CDC immunization competency course. So for my disclosures, I have received honoraria from UBC for past webinar presentations. I have no conflicts of interest or further disclosures to note. Great. So I'll just start with some history on the immunization competency course. It was developed in 2012 to provide foundational education that aligned with the immunization competencies for BC health professionals, which is based on the Public Health Agency of Canada's immunization competencies. Since that time, the content in the course has been routinely updated to align with any changes to the immunization program in BC. As online education has evolved over the years and recognizing that learner engagement is key to understanding online course materials, it was decided that the course needed an update. So there are several groups of healthcare professionals, and many of you are in this room, that provide immunizations in BC. The immunization competency course, which includes the immunization skills checklist, is intended for healthcare professionals who are new to immunization practice, including nurses, pharmacists, naturopathic physicians, and community paramedics. Nurses working in public health settings may use the immunization skills checklist every 3 years to reassess competency. The course improvement project was informed by an evaluation survey, and key updates include a complete review and update of course content, a new, more user-friendly, interactive, and modern learning platform, one course for all healthcare professionals in lieu of the 3 separate courses, referring to the BC Immunization Manual throughout the course, and the inclusion of reducing immunization injection pain, incorporation of the anaphylaxis initial emergency treatment course, enhanced informed consent content, updated immunization communication and vaccine hesitancy content, the addition of culturally safe care considerations, and the revised immunization skills checklist. The cultural safety content that was added to the course and the immunization skills checklist was created in collaboration with the First Nations Health Authority immunization team and in consultation with the BC CDC's Chimamak team. We'd like to gratefully thank all of those who took the time to support this work, and we humbly acknowledge that we continue to learn and commit to refining our resources with the aim to support cultural safety within immunization practice. The cultural safety content added to this course aligns with the Indigenous cultural safety and anti-racism guiding documents that have become available over the past few years, including the In Plain Sight report and the Indigenous cultural safety, cultural humility, and anti-racism practice standard. The BC College of Nurses and Midwives and the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC developed this practice standard in 2022. And since its development, other BC health regulators have adopted this practice standard, including the College of Naturopathic Physicians of BC and the College of Pharmacists of BC. So just a little bit about how the course does look. This is a section that we have included, and it's titled Providing Culturally Safe Care as Immunizers. It includes fundamental information and links to resources and informative videos. We also have key messages pertaining to culturally safe care considerations that are woven throughout the course as they relate to specific content within each module. And as Bhavna has described, the learnings from the FNHA project provided recommendations on incorporating the Indigenous cultural safety, cultural humility, and anti-racism practice standard into the provincial immunization skills checklist. The revised version of the checklist is available on the BC CDC website and within the immunization competency course on Learning Hub. And we do recognize that many healthcare providers have already completed the previous course and checklist. Healthcare providers are welcome to view the new version of the course and the checklist for their own learning. More information can be found on the BC CDC website, which links to Learning Hub where the course can be accessed. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you, and thank you for your time and attention.
All right, thank you, Bhavna and Kathy, for your presentation. So now we will take a 30-minute break for a nutrition break, networking, and poster viewing. So the posters are in the adjacent room to this room, as well as the snacks, and we will reconvene at 10:30 sharp. Thanks. So welcome back, everyone. If you can please take your seats. Thanks. I'd like to welcome our next presenters to the stage, Harlan Pruden and Melanie Crine from the BC Centre for Disease Control, who will be presenting on the experiences of the Indigenous Knowledge Translation Working Group. Again, please refer to your program for the biographies of our speakers.
Dante. Goodness, there's so many people here. Okay, first of all, I just have to make an announcement. This was in the lobby. Look at this. Whose is this? It's right here.
Presenters,
Dante, ka Harlan Pruden igwa waka no mani igwa motor mouth mabel. Kanona skumtin in awawa masquim slay with Squamish. Kia maga namoya Nandao, Niha Nehiao Niha Ayakwe. Greetings, my relatives. My government name is Harlan Ferdin. My Indian name, and I do use the I word, is Wakat no Mani, but you can just refer to me as Motormouth Mabel because we have a lot to go through right now.
Hi there, I'm Melanie Carine, and just want to recognize that I am a settler of British and German ancestry, and excited to present here with Harlan.
Cool, so we're going to be talking about the Indigenous Knowledge Translation Working Group. And of course, Melanie and I practiced really well in the presenting and the presentation. There's going to be some awkward transitions, okay? As she pushes me out of the way. Our relationship with financial sponsors, we wish, give us money. But we have no conflicts of interest, but we do have statements of relationship. And in my introductions, I did say that I am First Nations. I am beholden and tied to Indigenous people and working for better tomorrows. And I just want to make sure that that is clear, and you will also hear it through the work that we're doing. So some background. Where did the Indigenous Knowledge Translation Working Group come from? So really early on in the pandemic, we heard from our team members, but we also kind of knew this leading up into the pandemic, that there was the digital divide is huge within the Indigenous community, and especially for our older folks of like not having software and or hardware. Finally, community members, and especially our elders, who had limited reading and writing comprehension as a result of either the residential boarding school or the 60 scoops, lack of education, right? Y'all want to say residential boarding schools? We didn't graduate. And so if an elder did live and make it through the experience, they had no or limited English and writing. And then finally, community members with mental and or learning disabilities made textual as well as online-based knowledge translation products completely inaccessible. And so these were some of the limitations that we heard from community of like when we were developing our guidance and we were posting up on the website, it was completely inaccessible for many within the Indigenous communities. And so what we did was there was an outbreak in late January 2020, 2021. 2021. And in Chaskin, or what you would know as Kamen Lake. And all of these things that we talked about are the issues were confluence and were at play within this community. And so Melanie and I and a couple of other folks, we worked throughout the weekend and we developed some KT products for our Indigenous relatives. And we'll talk a little bit about that work in a bit. Actually, we'll talk all about it. So we've quickly formed a working group from the success of the first 2 KT products that we worked on over the weekend. And we formed a working group to identify priority topics for Indigenous peoples and communities with a focus on prevention and vaccine message. The working group also supports the content development, engagement, as well as the dissemination of new resources. This is a list of our current membership, and it's important to note that it is like a lion's share of the membership is our colleagues, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous colleagues at BC CDC. But we also have some external partners, and we're so incredibly grateful for their participation with the BC Association of Aboriginal.
It's okay. Harlan's just presenting my slides, but it's totally fine. This is how much he presented. I'm like, go for it, Harlan, just keep going. It's totally fine. I'm just going to go along with it. We have no notes on our slides anyways, so it doesn't really matter. So anyways, it's been a great collaboration. It started with about 4 of us and has since grown to the list here with the BC Aboriginal Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers, First Nations Health Authority. I think we've also working with Métis Nation BC, and I think what's really been really valuable was Harlan has mentioned that from the Chimamuk team, which is Harlan's team at BC CDC, is two of the folks on our committee, Andrea and Amanda, they do live in their communities, and that's really helped to bring us back and share the stories and listen as we moved along. Our group it's always flexible. Some people come, some people don't. We meet weekly, but been a really great it started small and it just keeps on growing. All right, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about our initial work that we started on that Harlan mentioned. And this was one of our first resources. That one weekend that we got together, we had a graphic designer, but we needed an illustrator. And at that time, we didn't have an Indigenous illustrator. Now we do, Shoshana Green, who's amazing. But we really wanted to look at some of what you heard from the other slide that Julie and Fairley and Doreen presented, was we wanted it to be culturally appropriate. We wanted it not to have too much language involved. And so this was the first handout that we did around prevention for COVID. And at the BC CDC, we have a public health reference group, which is public health physicians and nurses. And I think some of those earlier pieces were really great relationship building within that other community with the medical professionals. And I remember one of the first comments was we were asked, like, what about the eagle? Like, what's with the eagle for the distance? Like, that doesn't make sense. And I was like, yeah, but that's what we heard from community, because that's what makes sense to them. And so just having some of those relationships, I really think that they set the foundation for the work that we did around vaccinations, where there was a lot of complexity and a lot of information. And now it's your turn.
Yay. Awkward transition.
No, but that was a nice, like, I totally lined up, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So what we want to do is just look at some of our vaccine messaging that we, as a group. First of all, you will see here we were like trying to educate the community around the various different vaccines that we were rolling out. And you can kind of see also that we it is meant for paper and paper distribution, and it is illustrative. You don't have to read the text. You can tell yourself the stories through the images. And so we spend a lot of time working with our graphic designers. The community was like, these are great, we want to post. And so we designed both in color as well as in grayscale for printing. And again, this is why is it important to get your second dose? And again, it is that medicine wheel. It is illustrative. Don't say cartoons, illustrations. Where are you? Oh, and this is our attempt, well, it's our it is our resource to address vaccine hesitancy. And so there was much conversation within the group in that current and/or what the literature says around best practices. It's called the truth sandwich. Say the truth, state the misinformation, pivot back to truth. But the group was like really not comfortable with that, because in giving that space for the misinformation, we become a disseminator of that misinformation. We give it credence. So what we decided to do was to skip and just go to vaccine promotion, and how best to do vaccine promotion than featuring our Indigenous doctors. So there's 6 posters within this suite. And also folks said, we want to share these. And so we also designed them for optimal sharing across the social media platforms that we had access to. So Facebook, the Instagram, and the Twitter. So you'll see here is our Métis doctor, Kate Elliott. So happy that they were blessed with twins. I've yet to see them. And this is the shareable, and you can see that it's stripped down, but the message is still there. And again, it is one of our members is a participating organization is the Métis Nation of BC. This is another print resource, and again, you can kind of see the robustness of. And I'm not going to go through, but each of the print has a corresponding shareable, and this is the one picture that has all of the doctors. And then after we released them and shared them out into community, you have a really robust network in which that we can get it out. And with our email list, it is with a concentration in the north and the Northern Health region. After we released it, we got an email from the Kamloops-Sissequetmik Health Department. And this is right before their announcement of the confirmation of the 200 unmarked graves. But Kamloops-Sissequetmik said, hey, we have 2 roadside billboards. Can we take some of your posters and put them up on our roadside? And we're like, absolutely. Do you have a designer? And they're like, no. And they're like, we will provide the technical assistance. So Estella and I, our graphic designer, worked with Patterson to get their design specs, and we relayed out a poster. Like, who knew that a sign that has more than 7 words becomes a driving hazard and a distraction? So we had to distill Terry's information down. And to our knowledge, this is the first time that BCCDC has had a roadside sign, and there were 2 on Secwepemc territory. Again, we hear from the community that there was hesitancy around pregnancy or those that are blessed, people that are blessed with a child and COVID. And again, it's coming from an elder's perspective. And again, you can tell yourself the story. This is the color, but there's a corresponding grayscale. Tell me when I'm not supposed to.
Yeah, this is your slide.
Okay. Feeling sick. So this is one of our recent resources in which that we did not want to make a distinction because there is a little bit of vaccine just overload within our community, right? And specifically around COVID. And so we called it more of taking a general conversation of, we don't care if you have a cold, a flu, or COVID, you can get vaccinated around that. And the messaging around that so that we can get needles into arms. And so just notifying the community of, if you're not feeling well or you're scared of getting sick, there are interventions out there. I know.
Yeah, you're on it now. So just where we're going quickly is that we're building out of COVID now. Harlan shared the when you're sick one, which is looking at other respiratory viruses. And also after COVID, really looking at what the needs were within community. And we heard that the loss, the grief, the stress, and so, I'm clicking. So we made this beautiful handout, and I recommend you all look at it around this conversation around mental wellness and well-being. And so that was one of the ones we recently worked on. We also, of course, we had Mpox come, so monkeypox, so looking at what are the needs there, and we found that it was really more of the in-community, remote, rural communities that required some information around that. And then now looking at the toxic drug crisis is where we are right now. And then we're gonna do our takeaways. I'm just gonna put them all up there, Harlan, and you just start speaking.
Sure, let me get my cheat sheets. So the first takeaway that we have is our work and how we work is informed by Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. And so you kind of heard that from the first presentation around oh my goodness.
Around the vaccines?
Yes, I'm losing it because we have a 2-minute mark. Now I'm going to have to talk really fast. So our work is done in the circle. It is relational accountability, and where we take the time to know one another, but also we're informed by that context as well as community, and we work in service too.
Yeah, and I think we're really, Harlan's word is reconciliation. And so I think some of the work that we're doing, having a settler and Indigenous person working together, and we're facilitators. So we're not chairs, we come together. We don't have an agenda. We develop the agenda as we come together. We do check-ins. The check-ins sometimes take 15 minutes. We give it as much room as it needs to check in. And so we're really trying to change the way we're working. And like with the two-eyed seeing that was mentioned, it's really giving the Indigenous voice to the work that we're doing. And we have 1 minute. Go for it.
Cool. That two-eyed seeing is what I was trying to remember.
Oh, okay.
Yay. So there's an emphasis on content of lived and or living experience of Indigenous people. So it's incredible that we have a nice mixture of Indigenous as well as non-Indigenous people. And so for the working group, we are really reconciliation. We are a group of reconciliation. We as a working group, the working group is that we're learning to build trust at the same time share health information. And so it's listening to community and meeting community where they are at. The importance of partnership and collaboration with First Nations Health Authority, the Métis Nation of BC, BC Association of Aboriginal Friendship Center, the Patient Safety and Quality Council, the Secwepemc Band, Chiwamuk Staff and Network, and right now Health Canada is thinking of joining us so that if there is a resource or a conversation that is of national scope, they want to have it translated into French.
And I think just the last one, because we're done, is just to say that I think one of the key takeaways is coming in, especially as a settler, coming in, without your own agenda, without all that medical knowledge. Like, you're bringing it to the table, but you're really listening. And I think that's the truth part of Truth and Reconciliation, is really listening to what the needs are, letting go of what you think is best, and listening and working together in collaboration to bring those two pieces together.
A formal thank you to a group in my language. Informally, we would just say hi, which is really, and it's always a statement of gratitude, to walk with gratitude and also to walk with love. I also just want to witness, honor, and acknowledge that you are our medicine people. Y'all may not think of it that way, but I would encourage you to start thinking of yourself as medicine people, where you're working and engaging and trying to get in better relations with Indigenous people. And what does it mean to be a medicine person? And how do we conceive, and how do we as Indigenous people look at medicine people? That is your charge, and I believe that is the gift. And I just would like to thank Uncle Shane and for opening us in a good way to remind me of that teaching.
Great. Thank you, Melanie and Harlan, for your presentation and the amazing work that's been developed by the Indigenous Knowledge Translation Working Group. I'd now like to invite our final presenter to the stage, Ian Rowe from the BC Centre for Disease Control, who will be presenting on Kids Boost Immunity and Indigenous governance.
Thank you all. That was a hard act to follow, Harlan, Melanie. I need a sidekick here. I think someone I'll talk to myself, I guess. I'm used to that. So I just want to first acknowledge I'm a white settler of Irish and British extraction. I've lived in BC for 30 years, but I grew up in Newfoundland. Bonnie knows that. It's the traditional home of the Beothuk, we say Beothuk, but Beothuk peoples, who unfortunately are no longer around. And I'm going to talk to you about Kids Boost Immunity. Some of you may be aware of it, some not, so I'll start with some basics. It's an educational program for children in schools that we developed in 2018 based on another product we had called iBoost Immunity, and it's quite simple in terms of how it's put together, but it's based around educating, in this case, children through quizzes and lessons that are tied to provincial and territorial curriculum. So it's a national program funded through Public Health Agency of Canada, BC Ministry of Health, and some private sponsors. So in terms of financial disclosures, I'm not making any money, sadly, but we are funded by private and public dollars to help pay for some of the rewards that we give out. The twist with the program is that kids do quizzes after each lesson to help solidify their knowledge. And if they get 80% on the quiz, they earn a vaccine for UNICEF. So it's, as far as we know, it's the only program of its kind around. And we really wanted to take a holistic approach to this issue. I mean, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that vaccines, to be effective anywhere, need to be everywhere. That literally means everywhere. Diseases don't respect borders, so we always like to say vaccinating kids in another part of the world is not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. I remember Monika dealing with measles, airplanes coming in, and we've all dealt with that. So that's really the basics of the program. So when it comes to community, we kind of take this one world or a holistic approach to this issue. And so I think we had a lot of natural affinities with Indigenous approaches to community. And so we started to integrate some of our lessons to have Indigenous values, perspectives, and experiences. And so I'm going to talk to you about Indigenous governance, which is the new cool thing, I think, I hope. But first of all, I'm going to show you some of the lessons that we have. And sorry, I'm just going to quickly go back here. So this is the website. You can see this year there's 428,000 questions answered. We just passed the 4 million mark with questions. And we have things like activity feeds. Oh, thank you. Activity feeds, so you can see 2 minutes ago, someone somewhere earned some vaccines. It's gamified in a sense. It's not a game, but there's leaderboards, so kids really like that idea of competing, that friendly competition. That and Kids Helping Kids really are we think the content is good, but really it's that that engagement of friendly competition and kids helping other kids. That really is the real engine for engagement. So where we started with this a few years ago was with engaging with Indigenous folks to develop some of our first lessons. We take a very broad-based approach to the curriculum. Why? Because teachers don't want to learn about vaccines all the time. This is really meant to target teachers, not healthcare providers specifically. And if we just made it all about vaccines, we wouldn't get very far. But believe me, we tried that, didn't work. So we take a very broad-based approach. I like to think all roads lead to Rome in that sense, that, you know, critical thinking and online evaluating information online. If you're smart at that, then you'll be a supporter of vaccination. So you can see we take a very broad-based approach. You have climate change. We have climate change in health, for example, biology, 3 levels of government, etc. And I'm just going to focus in on the germs in the body's defense system and how vaccines help. Here's where we started. So we started with a lesson called New Diseases on Turtle Island. And this is story-based, an Indigenous community health nurse, Indigenous nurse. Her child was nervous about getting vaccinated. So she tells the story of smallpox and the history of smallpox in BC from an Indigenous perspective. It all ends up in a good place. She reassures the child that vaccines are safe, but it's told in a story format. The way that the website works is that you can either read the story or you can listen to it if you'd rather do that, because we know that kids are diverse learners. And then we started with it. We also had another lesson here, as you can see. This one we're really proud of. It's called Hummingbirds Vaccine. And I think it's being played in the lobby or somewhere out there. But it's based on a book that was developed in a community here in BC. The artwork was done by kids in grades 1 to 4. It's a beautiful story about a raven and a coyote play a trick that brings the disease to the people, and a hummingbird brings a vaccine that helps. So we did a video based on that, using the illustrations, using an elder to do the voiceover, and that's one of the things I'm most proud of, actually. So we have a few lessons like that. I won't go into the other ones, but the thing that we've been working on for about the last 8 months are these new lessons, and they're in draft format. So just want to state that up there. So I'm going to show you just a couple of examples. These are based on an Indigenous educator in Manitoba who had lessons for grades 10 to 12 that he developed over several years. He's just retired. And we took his cue and worked with Manitoba and Manitoba Ministry of Education to work with other teachers to bring to use these as a base to develop a set of lessons. Right now we have 37 lessons that we're about to launch for grades 4 to 9. Based on these grade 10 to 12. After that, we're going to be adapting the 10 to 12 into this format. So it's probably going to be in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 lessons. We have about 350 lessons on the website for kids at this point in about 70 learning modules. So every learning module has several lessons. So this is one for grade 5, First Peoples of Turtle Island. And you can see we have several stories. This one story of the Sky Woman is an Indigenous legend of it's a creation story that a woman came from another place, came to our planet, was the great-grandmother of all humans, etc. So it's again told in a story format that is familiar to everyone. The lessons have interactive, we call them widgets, but they're kind of games. It could be word games. In this case, it's put the story in the right order, so that, again, it's a way for kids to remember the story, and then they can check it. So as you can see, every lesson has a quiz. Again, that helps solidify the learning if they get 80%. And lots of kids don't get 80% first, which is fine, but they're incentivized to do it again. Why? Because they want to earn a vaccine for another child, or they want to beat their classmate, which is fine either way. You know, I've heard the term time immemorial. Bonnie mentioned it earlier. We have a lesson on this, and I think Bhavna mentioned it. It was on one of your slides. So this lesson talks about the history of First Nations peoples coming to North America. Usually we have a vocabulary thing here, so time immemorial. We have you can sound out the word. and it also gives a definition for children, so this would be grade 5. This is kind of a sciencey one for grade 5, focuses on artifacts that have been found, genetic testing, DNA, First Nations artwork, Indigenous artwork, the land bridge, right? All this stuff you may all know about, but imagine if you're in grade 5, this is all new. And then, so you can see we have several lessons here from grade 5. I'm going to show you one more. Colonization and cooperation. So this is also grade 5. So you can see we have treaties. What is colonization? The Indian Act. The Indian Act is one I'll just highlight quickly. Again, these are in draft form, but this is Fathers of Confederation, the Indian Act, how Indigenous peoples were systematically not included in that. Try to include visuals. We're going to be adding more visuals. Again, these are in draft. History of residential schools. This is from Manitoba. Trying to bring it more contemporary, the apology from the Pope recently, and then the fact that the Indian Act is still a law in Canada, and in 2021 we've had our first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So we're trying to be as current as possible on this. And and so I wanted to show you one more, and that was here. So how many of you have heard of Rosa Parks? Viola Desmond. Okay. So what you know about those folks is that they acted against an existing law, an unjust law, for good reason. And Viola Parks, I'm happy to say, Desmond, sorry, mixed them both up, is on the $10 bill now, right? So how many of you heard of Gilbert North, Chief Gilbert North? Few, yes, I thought you would, Harlan. I haven't, and I'm embarrassed that I haven't, but we also have lessons in here that wanted to tell a story of agency, of autonomy, of reclamation against unjust laws. And the one I want to highlight, and it gives me chills actually just thinking about it, was Chief North. Oh, that's a letdown. This is about a First Nations community in northern Manitoba that had residential schools for years, like all First Nations. Every year the kids would come back in the summer. They would fly in, from the residential school. In 1972, there was a plane crash. 8 kids were killed, obviously devastating to the community. Just after that, Gilbert North and its council were elected, and they kicked the Indian agent off the land. They said, enough of this. And that inspired other other First Nations communities in that area to do the same. And so it's quite inspiring, actually, when I actually read through this. And what I'm also really happy to report on this lesson was developed by this community. There were 15 members of the community that contributed to this lesson, and because they wanted their story to be told. And so I think, we're trying to play a part. I love reconciliation. I love that term. We're trying to be active in this space as best we can to educate the next generation, as we've heard about, of children to know about these stories. And, let's get Gilbert North or someone like him on the $5 bill. That's how I go right to that. And within a year, they had built, Gilbert North had built that community had built their own school, and kids never had to go again. And so, that was a brick in the wall that came down as a result of one person's action. Well, that wasn't one person, but that council, one community's action in this space. And I just wanted to leave you with that because it's a very inspiring story. So we are planning to launch these lessons. As I said, they're in draft format now. We're having reviewers, Indigenous reviewers, look at them in several provinces. We started with Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and now we're working on British Columbia to do the same. And we're also working with Nova Scotia and New Brunswick coming up as well. So, as I said, I approach this with profound humility, being, the middle-aged white guy here. But, I have to say I'm very proud of the work that our team has done, and I can't wait to show it to the rest of the world. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ian, for your presentation. I'd now like to invite all of our speakers from our first session back up to the stage, and we will start our panel discussion. For those in the room, if you have questions, you can make your way up to the microphones on either side of the room, or for our online participants and in the room, you can submit questions via Slido and upvote questions that you'd like to be addressed. Okay, welcome everyone. There's microphones on each of the tables too that you can pass around. Okay, we can go right to our Slido questions. If we can have our team read off one of the questions.
Just to double check, are Doreen and Fairlee with us as well?
What was the question?
Okay,
Fairlee and Doreen.
no worries. There were some questions, I think, directly for them, so I'm just going to run down the list. So a question, I think, for Kathy. For individuals who have completed the immunization competency course prior to the update for the culturally safe care, how do learners access the new version of the course to review the culturally safe care content?
That's a great question. Can you guys hear me? Oh, great. So as I spoke about, the BC CDC website has more information about the immunization competency course. You are welcome. Any healthcare provider is welcome to register in Learning Hub and review the course. If you've already completed and you already have your immunization competencies, you can go through the whole course and complete it and get another certificate. That's totally up to you. But I welcome you to review it. There is a lot of changes to the course, and again, there's the addition of the culturally safe care considerations throughout the course that I think would be very valuable to everybody. Thanks.
Great. Okay, Julene, we can go with another Slido question.
Okay, great. I think this will be for Melanie and Harland. As co-facilitators of the Indigenous Knowledge Translation Working Group, have you had any aha moments? And if so, what have they been? And I might actually group another one in regards to the biggest challenges of the group as well.
I guess the aha moment is, for our working group, is the collective knowledge and wisdom of the working group. And so in the public health reference group, there was BC Behavioral Insights, which provides research to the ministry as well as other organizations. And TAC, who was a part of PHRG, was following our conversations and looking and reviewing our materials. And we had flagged that we were going to address vaccine hesitancy. And so TAC was like, let me join your working group for that meeting and so that I could provide research. And I was like, join us. But TAC took a humble approach and listened and waited for us to have our conversation. And at the end, TAC was like, you will know the research, but you're not citing the research. But you not only know the research, but you know more. And I'm like, yeah, because we're tied to community and we're bound by those communities, right? And then TAC was like, I want to join your working group and I would like to be a part of this so that I may learn and see how you all work. And we're like, come in, welcome, and just be in a good way, in good relation. And so that relational accountability is at play. And it's also our Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing that is also at play, of creating space for everyone. And we know from the fact that TAC, the learnings and the teachings that he gets from that community context of the conversations, the nuances of that we have to take into consideration in the development of our knowledge translation product, is he's taking that up into the ministry. Not only is he providing evidence-based, peer-reviewed journal articles, but is also providing wise practices, things that is learning, and their colleagues are learning from their participation and seeing how we do the work and how we are attentive to that context from the Indigenous lived and or of living experience that we have to take at play. So that's just the aha moment, is the power of collective knowledge and wisdom. And you also see that playing out here, that I am not an expert. We gather knowledge together, but we also must share knowledge together. And where it's not about an individual, it's about the group and our relationship. And so I'm like so incredibly honored that I get to sit in community with Melanie, my non-Indigenous relative, and literally is a relative in the deepest and the broadest sense.
Okay, thanks, Harlan. I think an aha moment for me is actually quite recent, and it's just the connection within that working group. And I think we talked about it with the reconciliation, that we're really changing how we're working. And we do these check-ins, and maybe a couple months ago, someone said, we have all kinds of check-in questions, and they said, can we just check in around how we're doing today? And there was probably 15 of us on the call, and people really shared, like, I'm not doing so well. My mental health isn't so good, or I've suffered from depression, or I've had a family member who's ill. And the richness that came out of that discussion, and I've never experienced that in a group of like 15 people coming together. And then just last week, Harlan and I came together, and he's like, so-and-so I don't think was doing well. So I followed up with him, and I said, I don't think so-and-so's doing well either. And Harlan's like, you should follow up with her. And so we both followed up with those folks and had conversations with them. And again, I just don't think that's something that we do on a regular basis when we're in a health authority working group or something, where we actually are really caring for each other. And the work isn't just about doing the work, it's about that relationship.
And I'll answer both questions around the challenges as well as the aha moment. Melanie and I, all of our COVID work, like we were seconded, everything is winding down, and we're going to like bi-weekly or twice a week or a monthly meeting, right? And Melanie and I as co-facilitators were like, hey group, can we move to a bi-weekly meeting? And they're like, nope, we want to continue on meeting hourly and weekly. They're like, okay, we will continue doing that. And it's those relationships that are so incredibly, and attending to that so that we may do good work. So all of the other COVID working groups are winding down, or the workload is less. Ours is still humming along. And I just think that that is both a challenge, which is a good challenge, but it's also an aha moment of like when you build in relationships, good work can happen and it is sustainable. Like people are working, but it's completely sustainable because it's based on relationship. And what we heard from the Cowichan folks is that relation and the importance of relationship so that you can do both good work, but we're also doing different work.
Thanks. And we'll go to Slido question.
Great. I heard Elder Doreen and Fairley are on the line, so there's been a couple of questions for them, so I'll ask that. Just related to the structure of the health center and how elders and knowledge keepers are integrated into the work. And then specifically, you mentioned traditional health practices and ways of knowing for clients in your community, and just wondering how that is specifically being integrated and addressed in your clinic. Okay, we're going to take a different question. Yeah, okay. We'll take another question, sorry. So I think this is generally for anyone on the panel. What do you attribute to the success of these projects, and how did you engage communities? And how did you build relationships between the systems and communities to create projects like these?
Maybe I'll start with that one. So I think we've heard this from a lot of the presentations. It's not you as the researcher or you as the public health person going into the community and telling them what they need to do. It's the reverse. It's actually the community coming to you and telling you what they need. And I think that's the key. If you go in there with your own agenda, whatever that agenda is, it's probably not going to go very far, whether it's a meeting or a project or a health center, you have to really listen. We've heard that a lot, and take what the community tells you and work with that. And they may not be where it may not fit with your agenda, and it may not be the goal that you came in there a priori to do, but unless you're willing to sort of do that, the work won't get done, I think, in any meaningful way.
So I can chime in too. I would say really about listening and sharing of stories. So, if we're the immunization team at FNHA working from home, sitting in our remote offices, not really getting out to community and having that interaction with clients and community members. But nurses are out there, community health nurses are out there and have that wealth of experience and knowledge. And every time we hear from community health nurses, these from their successes and things that they've learned from encounters that maybe didn't go so well, and how they change that up the next time. That's really valuable learning and sharing. And so creating space for stories and sharing that knowledge has really helped us bring some of these concepts to life.
Two things to add into the conversation. One, this panel. And Monika, thank you very much for being a ray of hope, but also sunshine, and also Stephanie, is the remedy must match the harm. And what I mean by that is, if I were to cut open my thigh, and I promise, and a healthcare professional promises me a Band-Aid, the remedy is not going to match the harm. In that, colonizers had no problem singling us out as Indigenous people. It's called the Residential Indian Boarding School, the Indian Act. And these policies had no problem singling us out. The remedy must match the harm. Single us out now. Redress and to take on those discriminatory policies. And that means a dedicated program of seeding space and place for Indigenous peoples, communities, and experiences. Colonizers had no problems figuring out where the Indians were and taking them to residential schools and having our culture beaten out of us. Single us out. And so this whole conversation around land back, if you're a landless organization, you're seeding space and place and centering Indigenous people is your land back. And when you humbly listen and you humbly engage, that's your land back. And so it's not this I'm not a landowner and I'm not willing land back to Indigenous. That will come. But what you can do is seed space and place and humbly listen to community. That's your land back. And then finally is that all knowledge is relational. A priori to knowledge is relationship, is what you're hearing here. And what we mean by that is if you can have a cure for cancer, but if you don't have a network to share that knowledge, or you're using language and ways of communication that no one understands you, do you have a cure for cancer? No. So if it is relationships that are needed, lean into the relationships. Doing those check-ins, making sure that we are in good relations and that relational accountability, which is an Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. And those are what the teachings that you're hearing in this panel. Dedicated space for Indigenous peoples, communities, and experiences, an acknowledgement to a priori to knowledge is relationship and being in good relations. And when you get in good relations, it is heart work, not head work. There's head work, but it is a meeting of hearts, meeting of spirit. Then you can do good work. And you are not going to impose your agenda, because it becomes a conversation. And I think that if you were to join the Indigenous Knowledge Translation, it is about the conversation, and out of that emanates good work.
Just to add, we just have a minute left, but I mean, what happened in our case is that the Indigenous educator approached us. We didn't approach him, but it was based on relationships that we had in Manitoba with teachers and a sense of openness that we had to wanting to develop more Indigenous material. And so I think those two things together really led to us and their excitement, frankly, and willingness to work with us because they saw in what we had to bring to the table was a tool. You know, we're in 800 schools across the country, and it's like, oh yeah, this is, we could really elevate this and amplify this. So again, we can get Chief Gilbert North on the $5 bill, or something like that. So yeah, I think it's that sense of openness and willing to, if you build good relationships, good things will happen.
Great, thanks everyone. That brings our panel discussion to a close. So I want to give a big hand of applause to our speakers for your presentations. Thank you. And I'll now hand it over to Megan Martin, who will moderate the second session of the day.